Welcome to the fourth edition of the DILAX Lab. I'm very glad that you tuned in today for this very first international edition of our DILAX Lab, which is a webinar series of which we do regular versions of. And I'm very glad that you are all here today to listen to more insights of the market with different experts. This webinar will take around 30 minutes, and if you have questions, do not hesitate to ask them in the chat. We will get back to them in the end of the webinar, and if ever we don't have the time to answer all of them, we will get back to you by email afterwards. Today's webinar, or the DILAX Lab, has the title of Design in Urban Spaces, How to Use Data for City Development. And I'm very glad to welcome today Jeff Risom. Hi, Jeff.
Hi, pleasure to be here.
Yes, it's very cool that you're here. You're Chief Innovation Officer at Gehl, making cities for people. Your background is in architectural engineering, also in city design and social science, which is very exciting. What I found. You're working in the field of urban development since urban development of over 20 years, and most of the time at Gehl. And you bring the innovation into the urban development. Or did I forget anything in your presentation?
No, that's perfect. Thanks.
Okay, very good. My name is Julia. I'm head of sales at the solution department at DILAX. I started at DILAX 3.5 years ago as a sales manager in the retail business for the French market, and then got more and more in the public authority, public mobility sector, where I'm working today. I'm working with city developers, with people from the retail business, from public authority. So it's very vast and broad, and we collect data for all of these industry to make better decisions based on these data that we gather. DILAX gathers this data with sensors, and we also have our own software products, which we presented also in the last DILAX Labs. And our headline is Local Data for Better Cities. So today, Jeff, I'm very excited to talk about this topic, also about you, and see your insight, or the Gehl insight in this topic. And if we talk about cities, if we talk about public life, or if we talk about cities, we also see buildings and streets. You, on the other hand, are more focused on the user experience. How is this, and how come, or how are streets for you, streets, buildings, and the infrastructure for you also important in designing cities?
Yeah. Well, I think, it's funny, maybe as architects or engineers or folks in technology, sensor companies, et cetera, we tend to see, the world through our profession. And so we might see cities as technology, as streets, as buildings. But if we shift our perspective and just remember what it's like to be, a parent, a sibling, a neighbor, an everyday person, then I think we start to remember that the city and our neighborhoods, our communities, are really about all of the stuff in between those structures, right?
Totally.
It's about the journey to places, the other people that we meet and see along the way. It's about the ability to have a moment of pleasure in the sun, or get out of the sun in the shade during some times of year. It's the opportunity to, meet a new person, meet someone, sit down and enjoy the rest of the city. And so that's what we call actually public life is, and the lived experience of a city is all the things that you do together outside of your home, work, and car. And really, we think that if we make that experience really good, if we invite for pleasure, for quality of life, for inclusive living, then then we've made the city better for everyone, not just the sort of architects, engineers, and technologists.
I really like this approach because it's really human centered, and we all are citizens, so we all live in the city. We all use the public transport. We all go to shopping. We are, as you say, we are parents. We have a profession, and I really appreciate this approach. However, what I know is that you work also with data, and that data is very important. So could you please explain a little bit more about how do you collect data, and which kind of data?
Yeah, so we collect data. We call it basically observational, or this, again, lived experience data. So we oftentimes work with community researchers, we call them, or they could be just local experts that go out into the actual locations that we're interested in learning more about, and they observe what's going on. And we make it easy for them to observe this information in an orderly, common, methodology that allows us to compare the information collected to other cities, to other places, and really sort of sort and organize that data so we could tell good stories about it, and we can help translate the data into something that decision makers, whether that be mayors or leaders of companies, can use to appeal to their users. So we have a digital app that we enable these sort of human sensors that are out collecting the data through the digital app. And we call this really thick data, which is a good complement to maybe big data, which groups like, I think I would put maybe DILAX sensors or other data sets there's more data there, it's bigger. And we combine it with this thicker data that's a little bit maybe more qualitative, or maybe more about perception, and find the things that machines can't really count. If you put that human sensor together with the machine sensor, from that human-centered perspective, then you can get some pretty good insights that, again, hopefully help city leaders invest limited funds in the things that make the biggest difference, helps private sector folks appeal to their target audience, and hopefully also help citizens sort of make their neighborhood and communities better places to live as well.
Yes, totally. You are right. We at DILAX, we collect data. We place sensors, for example, in cities, so in the streets, at buildings. We also place it in public transport, so to count people who board and alight in buses, trams, trains, etc. We place sensors in stores to see how many people go in there, to get more insight of how long they stay somewhere, and then have a long-term analysis of how people behave on a big scale. For our field, I know how to evaluate the data and to see how changes affected the behavior of people. So were there more people coming to a certain area, or were they staying longer, for example? How do you evaluate changes? Because you also have long-term projects because a city is living, a city is vibrant. So of course you have long-term projects that you're working on, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think, so we try to measure, begin a lot of our processes by asking some questions about, well, who do we want to invite? What experiences do we want to create that maybe don't exist today? What existing elements do we want to amplify and make even better? And then measure that impact over time. So if I make it more concrete, so we've been working with Town Hall Square in Copenhagen, sort of, the largest public space in the city. It's a transit junction already, and just about a year and a half ago, a new underground metro line opened there. And so we tried to understand how that public space is working in a variety of contexts. Like, how does it function when there's an event? What works during every day? How about rush hour times when the transit hub is really busy? what things do we see happening there? And so we measured that before the metro station opened, and then measured it again after that metro opened, and are now able to advise, the city kind of consistently about this sort of feedback loop, right? We talk about measure, test, refine, right? So now we know what's changed. Can we test things? For example, we see cyclists shortcutting through the town hall square because a new sort of nodes are created. Those cyclists are in conflict with people wanting to sit or spend time in the square. So how might we then design to accommodate that behavior, right? So we're constantly sort of looking at the city and responding to user behavior rather than just ignoring it. Or, you could respond by putting up signs and say, don't bike here. Or we can, if we want to be truly human-centered, we could say, oh, here's the natural pattern where people are biking. Let's design for that, and let's make it safe for others who aren't biking to still enjoy the square. And let's try that, and then we can measure again and see if we're reducing those conflicts, right? So whether it's a short project or a long-term project, it's about monitoring impact. It's about seeing how the plans that we make as designers or city shapers, how everyday people respond to those plans. Do they follow the rules like we thought? Do they find new incredible ways to use spaces? And then can we then sort of refine the design to respond to that? So it's syncing up with evolving urban culture. And that's why I think getting this data about cities is so important, because urban culture is, evolving very quickly, and we can be in sync with it and tailor our services, our design, our businesses, whatever, to that culture through this data-driven approach. Or we can be, ignorant of it and probably make a whole lot of wrong decisions. So it's about this idea, like the city's never finished, spaces are never finished. It's amazing, sort of ever-changing type of life in cities, and we can learn from it, learn from that design, and continue to go forward that way.
Mm-hmm. So, as you said, maybe you make the wrong decisions if you don't measure it. But what also happens with the development of the city if you don't gather the data and make analysis or make the decisions based on analyses?
Well, I mean, I think you're just you risk misallocating resources. You miss maybe making investments that only benefit a few people. If you're in the public sector, that's important, right? You want to make investments that maybe reach your most vulnerable citizens, children, elderly, whatever it might be. You want to be inclusive as a public sector entity. If you're in the private sector, you want to make sure that you're reaching your target audience, that you're appealing to your customers. And so if you don't have any evidence, you're just kind of shooting in the dark. You're putting money out there that you might be successful with every once in a while. But if you have the opportunity to be successful more often, to be more impactful with investments, then it seems like a really good idea to do. And so it makes good business sense. And I think what's interesting is that it also begins to help citizens basically be better citizens, maybe. I mean, better is the wrong word, but be more informed, and thereby be able to, whether it be more constructive in their relationship with city officials, or be more sustainable in their behavior, if that's what we are wishing for. It also helps, everyday people also sort of understand how their individual behavior impacts sort of the collective thriving of the city.
Yes, that also brings me to another question. So you were talking about the citizen who maybe has a good impact on it, or who can then relate to it and behave accordingly. Who also is using your findings? Who are you addressing on a first basis?
Well, a lot of times, it's a mix of city planning departments. We've been working a lot lately with elements around health and sustainability. So it could be, mayors that are trying to understand how they can have the biggest impact on sustainability, how they might reach their CO2 neutrality goals, and so we can, with these clients essentially begin to, because it's really hard. This stuff's hard, right? Like becoming a carbon neutral city, being more inclusive to all members of society, solving traffic problems, making sure investments are paying off. Like those things are hard, and so sometimes it's cities themselves that we're working with that are then benefiting from this to make investments. Other times it's real estate developers that want to understand more about how they might position their development. It could be also international organizations, that are dealing again with, say, health or issues like childhood development or whatever it might be. So we work with a lot of different folks, but again, the idea is that it's all about this shared idea of cities for people, right?
Mm-hmm. Very good. So, what about the influence of high streets? What are your outcomes there, or do you have any examples? So, anything shopping related, or in this direction?
Yeah, I mean, interesting. We've also looked a lot at this since COVID has hit. We've looked at the impact of COVID restrictions on city center high streets. We've seen a resurgence of some, adjacent neighborhood high streets. And what's interesting is that, because what we find is that a lot of retail units, a lot of retail groups, they might know a lot about what happens once the customer gets in the store.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe they know a little bit about some of the people passing by if they're sophisticated, but very rarely do they know more about this sort of that customer's experience in between their home or their work and their store, and also the role that store kind of plays, how visible or not visible it is in like people's everyday routine. So I think what we try to do is combine this outside in perspective. What's the health of the community, essentially. What things are changing and growing? What opportunities are there? Where are there other activities nearby that might be synergistic with the retail offer of a particular location? And then we try to combine that with, the data that the retailers might have about what happens after people are in the store. And we think that's a pretty strong and unique combination, actually, to differentiate, to sort of think about that customer experience, not only once they step foot in or go just by, but also be more aware of that holistic kind of point of view. And I think it gives retailers a chance to maybe target certain groups or tailor their offer, whether that be, the certain products they have in the store, tailor their digital offering, their digital sort of footprint, tailor that a bit more to the nature of the neighborhood. Rhythms of when it's busy and when it's not only right there in front of the store, but again, just sort of in the wider neighborhood context.
Yes, totally. I would also appreciate it as a end customer, to be honest. I mean, who wouldn't? And part of this experience is also, of course, how to get to these places. So this is also why we are at DILAX working with the three industries that are combined in these in the city development. So with retailers or real estate, with city developers, but also with public transport. And there we have our most of our clients are in public transport. We are experts in automatic passenger counting in the public transport. So how would you integrate this data source, for example, in your findings, in your analyses? Mm-hmm. Or do you take them into consideration, actually?
Yeah, I think again, if we can, so there's two ways. I think if we can add, so all that data about that maybe you all collect, and knowing really about peak periods and the efficiency of different transit lines. I assume this data is really helpful for that. If you combine that with also what we might be able to measure, which is also, what's the quality of the experience, right? So, and sometimes we can still count that by knowing a little bit more about the nature of the user. But also, again, if we're looking at the station, so like we've done some work with SBB, for example, Swiss Rail, in
we know them very well.
You know them very well. And what's interesting, again, it's a little bit like the retail question, right? So like the transit experience doesn't start and end just getting off and on the train, right?
Correct.
So there's more about what happens in the station. How long do you spend there? Can the station be a place where you even go when you're not traveling? Because it's a really nice place. Do you go there much before your train leaves or not? So there's this, like we said before, this idea to understand the station and the area around the station and the neighborhood in connection with the actual transportation data. So that's one thing. Then there's this qualitative aspect. So some of the things that we do are about, the quality of the experience. Is it comfortable? Who feels more comfortable or not? We can add that to it, and together, I think then that's again becomes a strong combination with the quantitative and qualitative, with the transit itself, and then the broader transit experience. And the other thing I'll say about SBB is interesting is that we got many different folks from SBB departments out in a few different stations and used this app that I mentioned. And we could say the app is like almost gives you new glasses to see your infrastructure. So because they were noting the certain things that the app asked them to pay attention to, they started to say things like, wow, this station's really difficult for mothers with baby carriages. Or I was out there, I didn't see a single old person using the elevator. What's going on? Or boy, that peak period time was way less busy than I thought. So this is also a bit of a tool to allow many different stakeholders within an organization, say if it's SBB operations, technology, whatever, to have the same experience, have some data that they've collected themselves that gives them insights, new ideas, innovation opportunities, a shared understanding about what works and what doesn't, in a way that it's like stakeholder engagement. So there's an interesting kind of extra layer of collecting some of this information yourself, putting in context to the data that sensors might be created, and again, just getting insights that are unique. And that's really what, in a world now where data is kind of everywhere, the differentiating factor is it unique data? Can you use it to tell stories that capture people's imagination? And can you use it to monitor the impact of your investments? And if you can do those three things about information that you have that no one else has, then it's a pretty big differentiating factor.
Yes, totally. And I could think of so many ways now to work together with you, actually, because also the live data would be an aspect. So to know, for example, if the next bus is coming, has a wheelchair place available, for example. It's this inclusive factor, which is very human-centered, which makes the whole difference, actually, of the livelihood or the quality of the city.
Yeah, absolutely. And then there's also what happens when you get to the place, right? Because like there's this idea, transportation and moving through and spending time, it's interrelated. And if you can understand a bit about both, then it's also interesting.
Yes. Then I want to talk to you about one more thing. It's the data privacy. I mean, it should be a no-brainer that all of us are respecting the rules and the regulations, and none of us wants to be controlled. And so how do you make sure that the data privacy is also secured, also in regards with the app and the users of the app?
Yeah, so the good thing about the app and the whole method is that you're not collecting any personal information, right? So there's nothing particular about the person's identity or face or anything like that that's being recorded, right? It's only, you're just, a human is just noting down who's going, if people are walking by, if they're roller skating or walking or biking, if they spend time, are they spending time alone or in groups? Are they sitting? Are they standing? But again, it's like about a generic person. It's not.
True.
It's not about identity in any way. So the sort of natural, and this is a method that we've used for 20 years, and first more analog and now more digital, and it's completely GDPR and everything else proof, as I think it should be, right? I think it's important. I think it's a pretty amazing trend to have some more control over your own data, and if anything, maybe this gives folks a bit more control over that going forward.
Sounds very good, and yes, I agree. Where it's a good trend towards it. My last question would be: as citizens, what would be your future outlook on the development of cities in, let's say, Europe, in regards also to mobility, to shopping, and the living quality?
Sorry, what's my hope, or
Yes.
what do I think is going to happen?
Both.
Well, it has been said so many times, right? But like, COVID has fast forwarded some trends about where we live, how we use our local neighborhood, how we shop, how we move. And so I think this is a great opportunity to really take stock of what matters most, and a few things, right? Like being able to enjoy the neighborhood around your home a lot more, and be more invested in it, right? I think in the future, people are still going to work locally. They might not work at home, but they're going to work locally. They're not going to always just commute into the office, and they're going to want more places around their home for that. So that's going to hopefully add pressure on investments, decentralized investments, where it's not just about stuff in the city center, but it's going to be important that local neighborhoods are good, high quality, green space, exercise, also places to work, right? I think we also have a chance to, in terms of mobility, to really utilize the infrastructure that we have, where it's not only about the peak time, spreading out use over the entire day, connecting different destinations, and thereby basically utilizing the investment more efficiently, right? So that's a huge opportunity, but we have to invite people back to transit. That's a big challenge, right? People are moving away from it. So I think these trends about local living, I think about shifts in mobility patterns. I think there's opportunities for new real estate models, where again, the ability to share office space in new ways might be super interesting. So these are like very concrete, sort of related to COVID, and I think the next couple of years, and I'm very interested to see how that plays out. But I definitely think that I think we're going to have even more desire for human contact after having a long time without it. I think we've appreciated how much it's vital, and even though we can get our work done digitally, there's going to be another appreciation for the type of things that we can only do together, and maybe we can find a good balance then between the two that optimizes each medium, handshakes and hugs, as well as Zoom meetings and chats and sharing links and all the technical recording and all the technical abilities. Hopefully we found a way to make city living like the best of both worlds.
Yes, I hope so too. And you can imagine, I'm very glad to be even here today in the studio. Get back off my home office for one day.
Yeah. And I've got my kids coming in and out of here every once in a while. So
Yes, I think everybody's used to that now.
yeah.
That was also one of our audience questions. So how COVID-19 changes the cities. So I think you answered that pretty well. But I have another question that I want to ask you, which came from our audience, which is, why do you consider it too expensive to collect data with sensors and surveys in the process of changing cities?
I don't consider it too expensive. Sorry if that was a misunderstanding. I guess I was saying it's expensive in the long run to not to not have that data, right? And that actually the data, whether it's connected by sensors or by the human-based observational analysis, I think is peanuts actually compared to the opportunity to invest money very wisely, to invest money targeted towards specific impacts, and then to be able to document the impact of that investment. So I think it's exactly the opposite, that it almost, it pays for itself very quickly, the very small cost of getting this information. The challenge is to know what to do with it, right? And that's where it takes some expertise. But I think it's more expensive in the long run to either not collect this evidence, or the worst thing is to collect it and then not use it. That would be expensive. But if you're using it right, then hopefully it's actually a really great investment.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying. I think that was important to say in the end. We also came, so the time's already, so if you have more questions, do not hesitate to ask them or to write them down. We're happy to answer it even afterwards. You can send an email to webinar@dilax.com, even if you have some suggestions, questions, or if you want to be even part of the DILAX lab maybe one day. So thank you, Jeff. Thank you for your valuable insights. It was really a great pleasure to have you here, and thank you to our audience. I hope to see you next time, and the next webinar, the next DILAX lab will be in February. So thank you very much, and goodbye.
Great. Thank you.